here to kill me?
No. You must live.
Terminator 3 is one of the most controversial and divisive sequels ever made, but does it deserve a reappraisal all these years later? Let's take an in-depth look back at the history of the film and then discuss if we have perhaps been a bit too hard on T3 over the years. You may be surprised to learn that as far back as 1991, James Cameron was open to the idea of a third Terminator film, saying if T2 was a success, a sequel might materialise. However, after T2's release and a huge box office, Cameron seemed to have a change of heart, saying he believed the story was over. Of course, the industry had other ideas, with Coralco Pictures co-founder Mario Casar confidently stating in 1992 that Terminator 3 would be made in the next 5 to 7 years. Ambitious of him. However, instead of making Terminator 3, something else happened to Coralco within that time frame, namely they went bankrupt.
You gotta be shitting me.
No, I am not shitting you.
20th Century Fox immediately pursued a $50 million deal to acquire all of Coralco's assets, including the rights to Terminator 3. However, the company withdrew their offer by 1996, losing out to Canal Plus, who inked a deal for $58 million. This deal included everything the company owned except for the future sequels, though Fox still intended to grab them because the plan was for the rights to be auctioned through the US bankruptcy court. James Cameron again was floating around the idea of a third entry, and he was excited to unveil his latest project, a 3D ride at Universal Studios called Terminator 2 3D Battle Across Time.
Whoa, where are we?
The future. Final battle between humans and machines.
The cast of T2 returned for the ride, and the idea served as a spark for Cameron to start writing Terminator 3, and he called Battle Across Time a stepping stone to the film. However, a large ship by the name of the Titanic sailed in to stop Cameron getting around to it, and his involvement was derailed. Meanwhile, Fox was still keen to make T3 a reality, negotiating for most of 1997 to try and get those pesky rights. Factors like the budget issues and Cameron's troubled post-production for Titanic eventually led to Fox abandoning their pursuit of Terminator 3, and the rights were auctioned to Coralco co-founder Andrew Vajna. Vajna had apparently quietly negotiated to acquire the rights, unbeknownst to Fox and even his friend James Cameron. Vajna claimed he had no idea Cameron was again planning T3, as it was hard to keep track of where he stood on the project. However, this event led to James Cameron finally stepping back from all plans for Terminator 3, and the kicker for Vajna was that without Cameron, Arnold Schwarzenegger initially refused to return to his iconic role.
I'm the party pooper.
James Cameron was the only one Schwarzenegger trusted when it came to the Terminator franchise, and so when his friend reportedly told him that he did not want him to miss out on T3 because of him, Arnold changed his mind and decided to come back. Schwarzenegger explained that Cameron essentially told him if it's a good script and a lot of money, he shouldn't think twice about taking the part. An early script for Terminator 3 featured John Connor working in a .com company, and the Terminator pursuing him was referred to as the T1G, a female machine with the ability to turn invisible. Now that James Cameron's arm was definitely not for the twisting whatsoever, other directors started to be considered, including David Fincher, John McTiernan, Roland Emmerich and Ang Lee, who actually turned the film down to direct 2003's fellow huge release, Hulk. By early 2001, lesser known director Jonathan Mostow and his producer friend Hal Lieberman were in talks to direct and produce. Mostow requested the screenplay was reworked by his friends, screenwriting duo John Brancato and Michael Ferris, who wrote the forgotten 1995 Sandra Bullock movie, The Net. The intention was to make T3 more of a road movie, following the general format of the first two films, because according to the writers, every time they tried something too different, it just didn't seem to work. The idea of a female Terminator was one of the big things that remained from the original script, although the machine being able to turn invisible was scrapped, with Mostow saying it was a step too far. Mostow also made a point of wanting to emphasise how obsolete Schwarzenegger's Terminator was compared to the TX. The director loved how outmatched he was in Terminator 2, and wanted to recreate that sympathy and underdog feeling again for the third movie. Originally, Edward Furlong was due to reprise his role as John Connor. However, in December 2001, the actor dropped out of the project due to his substance abuse problems. Nick Stahl was eventually cast as John, with Mostow saying he believed the actor could bring a certain emotional depth to the role. Linda Hamilton turned down the offer to reprise her iconic role as Sarah Connor. She stated the reasons for this was that Terminator 3 offered nothing new for her character, and it was ultimately a script that focused on the Terminator and John. More interested in Famke Janssen, who played femme fatale Xena Onatopp in the James Bond film GoldenEye.
No more foreplay. Take me to Yanis.
However, at one point the idea of the female Terminator was almost dropped, with Vin Diesel's name floating around to play a male version of the TX. Finally, lesser known actress Kristanna Loken, who was best known for appearing in the TV series Mortal Kombat Conquest, was offered the part in early 2002. In preparation for the huge role, Loken underwent 6 weeks of training consisting of weights, fighting and weapons, and also gained 14 pounds of muscle and took a mime class to develop the robotic movements of the TX, also taking inspiration from Robert Patrick, the iconic T-1000 from Terminator 2. For the part of Kate Brewster, John Connor's love interest, young actress Sophie Bush was originally cast. However, once filming started, Mostow started to feel like she looked too young for the part and replaced her with Claire Danes of Romeo and Juliet fame. Danes was on set the day after she was hired. Tensions arose early on between Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jonathan Mostow, as the veteran action star missed working with his friend James Cameron. However, by the end of the first week, Schwarzenegger started to believe Mostow was the right man for the job. Arnold performed a lot of his own stunts, but one was the insane chase scene involving the TX driving a mobile crane, as Schwarzenegger's Terminator hangs onto the crane arm as he is smashed through multiple obstacles and buildings.
Remember the hours and the days and the weeks that I spent hanging on a hook of a huge monster crane and get dragged behind this crane and get smashed into things with this crane. I mean, it was like unbelievable scenes where it was really close calls many times.
The scene required 14 cameras, because the crew only had one chance to film it. Schwarzenegger said it was the one time he was nervous doing a stunt because despite every safety precaution being used, there were many close calls. That's insane that a 50-year-old Arnold at the time had the guts to do something like this. What a legend. As for some of the other explosive moments, the team constructed flawless, life-size robotic replicas of Arnold and Kristanna Loken because certain moments were simply too dangerous for them to appear in. So yeah, there actually were robots created of the robotic characters in the film. So essentially a T-101 and a TX literally existed. Mental. After making such an impact in Terminator 2, Industrial Light and Magic and Stan Winston returned to build the replicas and the special effects for the film. Winston constructed the T-1, an early Terminator machine that appears near the end of the film, when the machines are beginning to rise. Winston said he based the design on being part tank, part robot, creating 5 of them, all controlled by hydraulics. The bathroom battle scene between the two Terminators included a huge amount of visual effects and CGI, and Mostow went on to say this was one of the most complicated CGI sequences in the movie. Arnold tried to play the Terminator physically on screen as much as he could, and for his final appearance in the film, when he is broken down and, as per his phrase in Terminator 2, needs a vacation, Arnold's Terminator form was a mix of his real body, prosthetics and CGI. The marketing for Terminator 3 was incredible. I remember the hype as I was a young teen at the time and had grown up loving the first 2 movies. That first teaser was pure goosebumps. It's one of the best teaser trailers of all time. Check it out, it might bring back some awesome memories. That trailer takes me back to a time when of course the internet wasn't the behemoth it is today, and you had to wait for anything about this movie to surface, and when that trailer did, it was like the world stood still. Terminator 3 premiered at Mann Village Theatre in Westwood, Los Angeles on June 30th, 2003, with its full US release taking place on July 2nd. The film captured 12.5 million on its first day, 44 million on its opening weekend, and ultimately ended up with 150 million in the US and Canada overall. The film went on to earn a full worldwide gross of 433.4 million. The movie was the 8th highest grossing of 2003, with Finding Nemo at number 1 and movies such as Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl and The Matrix Reloaded ahead of it. It was a massive year for movies when you look back, and Warner Brothers stated they still looked at T3 as a huge success. Critically, the film didn't do especially well, although some praised it as a good action film. Critics such as Roger Ebert were disappointed.
I just think this movie just didn't try as hard to be constantly stimulating and interesting and original and exciting. It just went for all the computerized special effects and all the chases and all the explosions, and I'm so tired of chases and explosions.
I remember coming out of T3 thinking something about it just didn't feel right. I, like many other fans, disliked the dismissive approach the film took to establish ideas in Terminator 2. The casting choices and some of the comedic moments in the script were also off-putting. Fast forward years later, several Terminator sequels have been released, and many fans are actually starting to rethink Terminator 3, realising that perhaps the biggest problem was the hype, and when you compare it to the Terminator movies we've got since, it's actually not as bad as you remember. Jonathan Mostow spoke out about this subject recently and stated that the problem with T3 was the fact that Terminator 2 was such a seminal movie, it would have been practically impossible to blow people away. James Cameron had a very interesting reaction over the years, to say the least, at the time calling Terminator 3 great, but rethinking his praise years later, going on to state Terminator Genesis was the real Terminator 3, until he got back involved with the franchise and made Terminator Dark Fate, which, funnily enough, he also called the real Terminator 3. Come on, James.
Talk to the hand.
Terminator 3 takes place several years after the events of Terminator 2. The audience are reunited with a now adult John Connor, who, after hoping he had changed the future at the end of the first film, is forced to come to terms with the fact that he and his mother failed, and a deadly TX has been sent back in time to eliminate him. Of course, the T-101 model Terminator is back to protect him, just as he did years before, and the fight for the future takes place once again in the present. Many fans were upset with the new take on John Connor specifically, but I have to say, for what they were going for, I think Nick Stahl is quite good. It's obviously not where I would have gone with the character personally, but he at least delivers as this paranoid mess of a man who has lived his whole life looking over his shoulder. Nick Stahl manages to convey several scenes with genuine conviction and believability, and while he's not the Edward Furlong John Connor, I do completely buy him as a different John Connor.
Imagine if you knew you were going to do something important with your life, something amazing. It may be the most important thing anyone has ever done. But there's a catch. Something terrible has to happen. The life you know, all the stuff that you take for granted, it's not going to last.
Perhaps the most disappointing thing about this version of the character is that one of the things I loved about John in T2 was his optimism, his belief in humanity, and his desire to work with everyone. You could see how he would go on to be a leader. Literally all of that is gone with John in T3. He's a complete mess. And I'm in two minds about it, because I have to admit, where John has ended up in T3 is actually quite realistic and believable. I've never heard anyone bring up the fact that John, in a way, ends up exactly where his mother ended up in T2. He's become alienated, terrified and unstable, just as his mother was. While you could call that a T2 rehash, for me I think it's an interesting way of going full circle and connecting John to his mother. And when you look back, John helped his mother out of that mindset, and then sadly years later ends up the same. Very nihilistic idea, but to be honest it goes along with the more hopeless feeling of the original Terminator, the fact that these characters can't run from their fate. Terminator 3 actually returns the franchise to its themes of inevitability and hopelessness. There's no way of changing the future as there was in Terminator 2. Sadly, these elements kind of went over people's heads, probably because all the misplaced comedy and bad lines distracted them. John didn't stop Judgment Day. The world is indeed going to end, and he is forced to take on this terrifying burden that he never wanted. You could kind of liken the situation with T3 to the dilemma they had with Alien 3 in that franchise, when it stripped away the happy ending of the previous film, and then wanted to go dark and bleak again. Whether you like it comes down to either your own personal preferences, or perhaps, like me, took a long time for you to get there, but you can see the positives now. I think in order to make films like Alien 3 and T3, sequels to films that have been wrapped up so well, you have to tear up at least some of the previous film in order to have a story, to have jeopardy and adversity again. You can't really have it both ways whether you like it or not. You either say no, I don't want it full stop, or you have to accept that if you're going to get a Terminator 3, there has to be a compromise. There's going to have to be changes in order to keep it going. It's kind of a catch-22. One of the other things fans criticise this new John Connor for is that he seems to be, according to them, pretty stupid. He asks the Terminator if he remembers him, despite knowing full well the Terminator he knew descended into the flames in Terminator 2. It frustrated a lot of fans because they interpreted it that the writers seemingly hadn't even watched T2.
You can remember me? Sarah Connor? Blowing up Cyberdyne? Hasta la vista, baby? Ring any bells?
That was a different T-101.
I agreed with this take for a long time until I watched this film for this review with my partner, and she brought up some pretty good points. What you have to remember is John met the Terminator as a child and was clearly traumatized by his final sacrifice. So this would stay with him as an adult, and he would have a very strong emotional bond to the Terminator. Perhaps he spoke from the heart, and because of his boyhood experience and the fact he's unstable now, he had such a strong reaction to seeing the Terminator again, it made him speak very quickly from emotion. Or perhaps his brain told him, well, maybe that Terminator possibly escaped somehow, some way, because we know Terminators can survive insane things. Maybe at the last second something happened. Also, we have no evidence that John would have known that multiple Terminators look like the one he knew as a kid. Only Sarah knew that. I see no reason why John would know that all Terminators of the same model look the same. I don't see why Sarah would have told him that. Seeing the Terminator would have brought back all these childhood emotions for him. He wouldn't be thinking straight. So when people say, oh, they didn't watch the second film, they made John stupid, I no longer agree. I think this whole scene was about the connection they had, tying it back to the second film, and showing us clearly where John was at mentally. Kristanna Loken is clearly extremely dedicated to her role as the TX, and you could see the influence that Robert Patrick has on her, because she really has taken a lot from the T-1000 for this performance. The laser focus and the emotionless stare is on point, and the way she delivers her lines are so methodical and creepy.
No.
She does suffer a bit from the whole bigger is better ideas, like okay, now we need an even more incredible Terminator than the T-1000. It becomes a bit gimmicky. It's like, now she can control other machines, now she can shoot out of her arm, now she can squeeze Arnold's balls, you know. Just, it was a symptom of where the franchise was going. The Terminator series became about topping itself rather than making it make sense. That doesn't mean the TX isn't entertaining. I mean, that scene where she takes over the body of Catherine's fiance and then puts her arm through the body of a police officer and drives the car is bloody mental. It's one of the craziest and most brutal moments in the Terminator franchise, so there is some fun to be had with the TX. Catherine Brewster, played by Claire Danes, is actually a very important character in Terminator 3. As the film progresses, she is revealed to be John's future wife, and her survival is crucial for the success of the Resistance. Initially, Catherine is somewhat naive and sheltered, but after the TX slaughters her fiance and her father too, she is forced to grow up and develop resilience, which eventually becomes determination to help John Connor. I have to be honest, despite her being a pretty decent character, Claire Danes just isn't fantastic, and when you're missing the talent of Linda Hamilton, she doesn't really live up to being the third main character. However, she isn't terrible. It's a little bit of a hit and miss performance, where in moments she doesn't fully nail Catherine's confusion and sadness, and at other times she does. It's just a performance that never really comes together. However, the idea of her character and what she means to John and the timeline kind of makes up for that. She represents the main ideas of Terminator 3 that, in the end, we actually cannot change our fate. Within T3's timeline, John and Catherine were always going to meet. T3 takes a different approach, delving into ideas of free will and determinism that suggest you might be able to change the way it comes about, but not the fact that it does. I've always been fascinated with the concept of free will and choices, and whether or not we are all just blindly going down a path already decided for us. Somehow this film actually makes the arrival of Judgment Day horrific, but dare I say it, bittersweet at the same time, because John and Catherine are hand in hand at the end of the film, realising that while we might not have been able to stop Judgment Day, there is always some good even in the greatest bad, and rebuilding is what humanity will always do. And I think one of the unique elements that people ignore was T3's setting in the film actually on Judgment Day, the day the machines rise. It's a very effective idea, because that scene where the Terminator tells John and Catherine it's happening today, and we see John's reaction, always sends a chill up my spine.
Judgment Day. The end of the world. Today, 3 hours from now.
The concept of being told on the day the world's going to end that it's going to end in a few hours is haunting. It's always stuck with me. I think it's a very powerful moment. And it ends with John realising that sometimes our destiny is not to stop the terrible things that happen, but to learn and grow from them. Even dare I say it, with the end of the world. These are challenging ideas, and the fact that T3, a film that has over the years been accused of being dumb, actually goes there and discusses this incredibly complicated theme of gaining something good from something truly terrible, the fact it even goes there proves that T3 is actually a lot bolder and braver than many viewers gave it credit for. That ending is one of the best in the franchise. It stands for something different than the T2 ending obviously, but I think it's just as meaningful and heartfelt. This is another moment where Nick Stahl's performance is very earnest, and that quiet moment of realisation and coming full circle is very, very good and wraps up the film so well.
Somebody please come in. Is anybody out there? Alice, you're under CQ. Is anybody there?
This is John Connor. Crystal Peak.
Connor? What the hell is happening? Who's in charge there?
I am.
Arnold Schwarzenegger is pretty decent in the film. He will never match his iconic moment in time role from the first two movies, but to be honest, in T3 he still nails the character and he's still just as cool. You have to respect Arnold getting into good shape and diving headfirst into the stunts, and while some of the comedy is pretty cringe, some of his one-liners do genuinely work.
Tell her who I am.
John Connor is leader of the worldwide resistance and last best hope of humankind.
One of Arnold's best scenes is when the TX has corrupted his system. I think it could have come across as laughable, but Arnold's committed performance sees it through. It's an interesting idea to see the Terminator fighting against his own system, which has been taken over by a more advanced machine. It's very, very intriguing. It's something we hadn't seen before, and Arnold delivers one of the best lines in the film, reminding John that while he may be there to protect him, programming can change that in a second, and sadly there is ultimately no real relationship between them.
You don't want to do this! Desire is irrelevant. I am a machine.
This is a different relationship than John and the Terminator had in T2. The Terminator and John never really bond. It really is a connection based on the mission. The Terminator constantly reiterates who John needs to become, and the relationship is all business. An example of this is when the Terminator informs John that, in the future, he actually terminated him.
I killed you.
a far cry from the father and son connection and the Terminator discovering morality in T2. Terminator 3 keeps him as a no-nonsense Terminator, and that was probably a very wise move. The Terminator and John's back and forth is instead about fate, responsibility, and never giving up. The Terminator teaches John to keep fighting through his unflinching tunnel vision, so there is something John gains from the Terminator in this film, but it's very different to what young John received in Terminator 2.
Our destiny was never to stop Judgment Day, it was merely to survive it. Together. The Terminator knew. He tried to tell us. But I didn't want to hear it. All I know is what the Terminator taught me. Never stop fighting. And I never will. The battle has just begun.
While the action isn't quite up to the iconic caliber of Terminator 2, T3 still has some pretty amazing action scenes. Everyone likes to talk about that crane chase, and yeah, it's mental. Now I know that Arnold literally did these stunts, it kind of blows me away. I was reluctant to call this a great action scene for years because I just compared it to T2's chase where the two Terminators pursue John outside the Galleria, but I think that wasn't fair. If you just look at it without that darn comparing, it's an adrenaline pumping chase scene of its own, it's pretty great. Mostow is no James Cameron, but he does have you enthralled and picks his shots well. There's cars and God knows what flying left and right. It's mayhem. There's other action that's good too, a few more great chases and a badass scene where the Terminator takes on the machines as they start to rise. I don't really love his fight with the TX to be honest, because it's got a lot of obvious CGI. As a live action almost Mortal Kombat fight, I guess it's pretty amusing. Ultimately, I think the negatives of T3 still tend to rear their ugly head a bit too much and just prevent me from fully loving the film. One of the main issues is there's a real lack of atmosphere. While Mostow can shoot an action scene, he can't create the mood that James Cameron did. The film is too light, too much of it takes place at daytime. In fact, all of it takes place at daytime. And you just end up missing that blue metallic tone and menace of T2, or the striking 80s vibes of the first Terminator. Now I'm not saying I wanted the same look, it's just that they made no effort to create one. It looks like every other movie, it's so cookie cutter, and the Terminator franchise should never feel like that. You've got to make it stand out in some way. The film also struggles to be memorable. Despite my reassessment and pointing out the things I like, other than the ending, not a lot of this film really is ingrained in my mind. That's an issue. A Terminator film should stand the test of time, and just being decent but not memorable is a bit of a shame. The film is also criminally underwritten. A lot of the stuff I praised in this video, like the discussions of fate and inevitability, are great ideas, and they could have gone so much further with it. You could have matched the thought-provoking themes of T2 with these ideas, they were that good. It's almost as if they just chose to halt the brakes on these ideas to make more room for the action, conveniently forgetting that the Terminator movies weren't actually about the action. It really was the ideas, just the action was so good at the same time. The performances also aren't fantastic, they're just good or decent, and the whole thing ends up feeling a little too ordinary for a Terminator film. You're just waiting for it to get off the ground, you want the excitement, you want that electricity, and it never fully gets there. And like I said earlier, the less said about the comedy the better. There are some genuinely funny moments, but the fact people still cringe when they think about the comedy just shows you this film went way off road with the humour. So is Terminator 3 a letdown or underrated? My answer is, honestly, probably both. Somehow, some way, it kind of is both. What do you guys think? Are you still not a fan of it to this day? Or have you been able to reassess it, but still not adore it, which is my position? Or do you actually love the film? Let me know in the comments. Let's talk about Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines. And if you enjoyed this video, click on another one on the screen now. I do these kinds of retrospective and analysis videos on classic films all the time. Thanks for watching and have a good day.